So let's just bring this parable up to date. You're on Tottenham Court Road, near Warren Street Tube Station, and you're working at the McDonald's there. This is the regular McDonald's for Newman House on a Sunday evening. And let's say you're on just over the minimum wage, about £7 an hour. You start at 8 in the morning. You're doing a 12-hour shift. You work hard, morning, lunch, afternoon. And then at 7 p.m, just a few minutes before you clock off, someone else comes in asking for work. And the manager says, yes, we need another hour. And they clean and serve and potter around for an hour. They hardly break a sweat. You both clock off at 8 o'clock that evening. The manager gives you the agreed, whatever it is, £84 for the day. And then he turns to this guy standing next to you and gives exactly the same envelope with £84 into him. This person who's just been there a few minutes, who's hardly done a thing compared with you. What do you feel? Now forget the parable, just what do you feel? You feel outraged. You feel this is unfair. You're even, if you're honest, angry. Okay, the manager isn't in one sense being unjust to you because you agreed £7 an hour. You've done your 12 hours. You've got what you were promised. But you still have, understandably, a sense of unfairness, of favouritism. And actually, my limited knowledge of the law, this would be illegal, wouldn't it? Paying two different people different wages for the same job. So that's the story, and that's the gut feeling. So how do we make sense of it? Well, I want to give you two quite different ways of looking at the parable, and just to see if they are helpful or not. The first way of looking at this parable is the uncomfortable one, and it shows us that God is, well, unfair. There it is, I've said it. God is unfair. Or put it in a less harsh way, that God doesn't treat each person in exactly the same way. Put it in an even softer way, that he has different plans for different people. He has different plans for different people. Now this is obvious just from human experience, from common sense, how different we all are. And it's clear from the many biblical stories of how he calls one person to one vocation, another person to a different vocation, a different way of life, without giving reasons, in a way that very often in the biblical story doesn't seem to make sense. So this is a human reality, God's unfairness, and it's a biblical reality. That the world is not flat and uniform. It's full of valleys and mountain ranges and jungles and deserts and seasons and differences. No one is the same, and God doesn't seem to treat us the same. We'd like to make sense of it. We'd like to understand why, especially when it involves me. Why have you done this to me and not to the other person, or the other way round? But often, and again this is part of the point of the parable, we cannot make sense. As the prophet Isaiah says in the first reading, the heavens are as high above the earth as my ways are above your ways, says the Lord, as my thoughts are above your thoughts. His love is beyond our understanding. His generosity is unexplainable. So part of the message of the parable for us is simply to accept that we cannot understand everything about God or our own life. But to accept this not just in a passive way or a grumpy way, but in a way that involves a real trust. To say to the Lord, I don't understand. I am confused. I am sometimes a bit angry, but I still trust you. And then the freedom that saying this brings to us, the glorious, beautiful freedom of heart that we feel when we can really accept and really trust. Because one of the most debilitating temptations that we all suffer from is to be comparing ourselves with other people all the time. The demon of jealousy. And this is actually Jesus' own interpretation of the parable, when he says very directly at the end, the Master says, and Jesus puts these words into his mouth, "Why be envious because I am generous?" That's God's challenge to us. Why be envious because I am generous? Now, I think jealousy is especially hard for students, and especially hard for freshers, for new students. Because let's face it, if you're here in your first week now as I speak, you are rootless. You're away from your family, you're away from your old friends, your old identity. You don't have anything to root you, to make you you, and so you're almost forced into comparing yourself with other people. What degree are you doing? What A-levels did you do? What gap year did you do? Which university are you at? And then there's this institutional obsession with league tables and with rankings. Oh, well, I'm very happy for you that you're at X university. What a shame you're not at Y university, which I'm at. And you're tempted to think that you're very ordinary and even that you're a little bit useless. That's the temptation, the voice in the head. Everyone else is better than I am. So if you are feeling ordinary this week, and you're thinking, why am I not more intelligent, more beautiful, more charming, richer, funnier, as popular as the person sitting next to me? If you're tempted to think that, well, my job as a priest is not to flatter you and say you're wonderful, although of course you are. My job as a priest is to explain the gospel, and the real message of the parable is just to stop comparing, full stop, and to trust that God knows what he's doing, and that he's given you just what you need to be you. He's called you to this life, this work, this university, this course, and to trust that you're in the right place. Really, you're in the right place now. Maybe it's going to change in the future, but now to trust that this is where the Lord wants you. So don't be jealous of what others have. And even more, be grateful for what you have, because gratitude is the antidote to jealousy. And even more, this is what will make you a saint, yes? Be grateful for what the other people have. That's the hard thing. When you notice how beautiful, funny, intelligent, I won't do the list again. When you notice their gifts, not just to be grateful for what you have, but to be really grateful for what they have, because you're glad God has blessed them in this way, just as God has blessed you in different ways. That's what will make you a saint, and also it's what will bring you great joy and great peace of heart, because of the freedom that comes from gratitude and being at peace about who you are and who other people are. The freedom of heart. So that's the first thought. God isn't fair, but it does have a meaning. But the second way of understanding this parable is quite different, actually. And it's to see that the master in the parable is utterly fair, but in a different way from how we expect. We think he should be rewarding the workers for how many hours they've done, yes? How many hours times your hourly rate gives you your salary. But what if he's not rewarding them for the hours they've worked, but for the fact that they have been willing to work at all? Do you see the difference? We misread the parable. We think it's about economics. It is about just rewards, but not rewards by the hour, rewards instead for turning up. It's a different kind of economics, and it leads to a different kind of theology and spirituality. So at this level, it's a parable about faith, about us saying yes to God in our lives, yes to Jesus, to the Master. And it's a parable that reminds us that this is what matters, because we're tempted to think that we have to achieve a lot to justify ourselves, and God forbid, to prove ourselves to God, to prove that we're worthy, which is nonsense. He makes us worthy by inviting us into the vineyard. Yes, there is work to do, but not work that makes us into good people. It's God that helps us to be good. It's God that blesses us. And ultimately what he wants is not our work or our hours, but it's our hearts. It's our yes. Some of the workers come late. They come at the very last minute. But what matters is that they've arrived. They've entered the vineyard. This is the joy of their faith and the joy of our faith, because we have them with us as brothers and sisters. Just to give examples of this, at Easter this year, in this very chapel, 3 of our students were baptised and confirmed and came to receive their first Holy Communion. What a great day and a beautiful Easter celebration. Can you imagine someone sitting on the back row saying, well, okay, but they've turned up a bit late, haven't they? All those wasted years, they've had it easy. It's mad, isn't it? They weren't wasted years. They were the years when God was leading them to this amazing point when they would become Christians and give their lives to Christ. This was the path that brought them to the vineyard, to the church, to the Eucharist. And we all have different paths. It's the same, to give another example, when someone has a deathbed conversion. Don't think this only happens in Graham Greene novels. The experience of every priest at some time of being called to someone as they're dying. The privilege of hearing their confession, of hearing them open their hearts with all the sorrow and the sadness and the regret, but the joy and the gratitude that at this last moment they're able to give their lives back to the Lord. The mystery, why is this happening now and not last year and not 20 years ago? Maybe God only knows. The joy of the angels, the joy of the priest, to give absolution right at the end of life, and to know that this is ultimately the only thing that matters, that they've been reconciled with the Lord and his church, and that they are ready to meet him in heaven. So you have many things to think about as the new academic year begins, and especially if this is your first year as a student in London. I pray that you can take away these 2 very simple thoughts from the Gospel today. First, please, don't waste your time being jealous of other people. Don't play the game of comparing yourselves with someone else or comparing what you have with what they have. God has his plans for you and for them. You may not understand these plans, but you can trust them. He has made you for a reason. Let's be thankful for that. And second, whatever your goals and priorities are over the next few weeks, make sure that within them you are saying yes to God and yes to your faith. If you forget this yes, everything else ultimately will come to nothing. But if you keep this yes at the centre of everything you do, everything will fall into place.